Savannah way.
Do you know, Mitch, I think if we carried on playing these songs back to back, it would take us about a week to get through them all. You've had the most ridiculous number of hit
Well,
songs.
the following week I wrote even more.
So those took you about a day and a half, did they?
Yes, total.
How long does it take then to craft a hit song?
Well, the main bones of a hit song happen in an hour or two, really, because you know you've got something really magic very, very quickly. Then the hard work begins. Then you've got to make things work and make things fall into place. And that can take a long time.
So is there a sort of formula? I mean, I know obviously it took you an entire book to write how to write a hit song, but is there a sort of formula that you can stick by? So could you learn how to craft a hit song?
No, you can get a lot of you can get a lot of hints for saving time, not having to waste your time going up the wrong way. But really, and everybody who says it's not inspiration, it's perspiration, that's rubbish. It's 99% inspiration, because you can come in and start writing one day and you can go on and nothing will happen. Another time you'll come in and you'll crack. A good example, Les Reed and Barry Mason, who wrote The Last Waltz, a whole load of songs in one, Delilah. They had the bare bones of each one of those within about 2 hours.
Oh, gosh.
And then they came back later and developed them into songs. But that bit of inspiration happened in a very, very short time.
Because I've heard people say in other interviews talking about songs that some people feel like that the sort of the best songs just sort of fall onto your lap.
Yes.
That they just sort of drop from somewhere. Has that happened with you?
Yeah, well, they do. And what you're doing really is it's a little bit like a jazz musician. And you've got a basic, you're playing around with tunes and things, and you're improvising. And as you improvise, and when you're writing songs, I'm trying to listen to what I'm writing as if I were a third party. I want to hear that for the first time, even though it's coming from me. And when you do that, you then won't settle for anything less than something really catchy. Mm-hmm. And you just throw the stuff away. You end up throwing most of this stuff away because it's just not good enough. And unless you're realistic with what you're doing, you're going to have a catalogue full of old draggy stuff. And so this way it concentrates what you're doing.
Have any of your more successful songs surprised you at how successful they've been?
Well, Down Came the Rain certainly did that, because that was written as a comedy, even though there's not a funny line in it. It was written as a comedy performance of an idea. And in Italy, somebody said, "Hey, that is a very nice tune." And it was a big group at the time called I Giganti. And they copied it. They covered it. And they did a completely straight ballad, a passionate ballad based on that song. And later, many, many years, and it went to number one and sold 360,000 copies or something in Italy. And some years later, I suddenly started getting money from Italy, better money than I'd ever had. And it took me time to find out why. And it was an artist called Mina, who was a very, very big star in Italy. And she'd covered it on an album. And it took off. And everybody started covering it. So I've now got loads, and it's one of my biggest earners, even though it only went to number, 7 over here or something like silly, 17, who knows.
And that must be really satisfying for you, because it was also one that you performed.
Yes, well, that wasn't the reason it was satisfying. It was satisfying because of the money it made.
Well said, that man. It does beg the question, though, nowadays as to whether or not songwriters can ever really have that same sort of success, because it's such a different industry now, isn't it?
Very different to compare. It's very, very different. So different I couldn't even tell you what the difference is. You know what I mean? Because it was just... There were a bunch of us in those days. There were, people like Les Reed, Barry Mason, Roger Greenaway, Roger Cook, Tony McCauley, and we're all still friends, actually. But we were all sort of bespoke songwriters. We would write for an artist with an artist in mind. Usually the artist happened to be at number one in the charts, because we knew if we got somebody who was number one in the charts and we wrote their next single, we had a much better chance of making it. And that's part of the trick, of course. So the songs you'll find that written by people like me at that time were written for, very often, for somebody else completely. You know, I wrote You Were Made for Me with the Searchers in mind. And they turned it down, and it went to Freddie and the Dreamers, and, you know, helped their career instead, you know.
And that's the thing, that must have been a wonderful thing to know, that you essentially launched the careers of a number of bands that became hugely successful.
Well, a good thing was Tom Jones, who I never recorded any of my songs, and Gordon Mills, his manager, used to turn everything down that I ever approached him with. Not through anything personal, he just didn't see them, you know. And so all those songs, I later went to Tony Christie. We found Tony Christie and started producing him with all the songs that Tom Jones turned down. And if you listen to Tony Christie, you can hear why. And not why he turned them down, but why Tony Christie became, used those songs. So.
Absolutely. Huge hits they were as well.
And he was a terrific singer. Fabulous voice, Tony.
Yeah. And that was when you sort of launched into producing as well. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. But before we go to the break, Mitch, we've just heard a selection of just a few of your hit songs there. Is there any one of them that you're sort of more proud of than the others, or one that you are sort of particularly more fond of?
Yes, I've always got a soft spot for the first number one. You know, I think you'll find most songwriters say that, which was How Do You Do It by Jerry and the Pacemakers. And that launched it. And then, of course, because it was How Do You Do It by Jerry and the Pacemakers, and in fact, the Beatles recorded it first. And then Jerry and the Pacemaker, and I turned that down, and they turned me down at the same time. So they didn't want another
explain
song.
That. You didn't like what they'd done with it, is
That's
that
right. And I felt that they messed it up purposely, because they were the Beatles. Who do they think they are? Lennon and McCartney? No, I mean, I really felt that they sort of didn't put their best into it, let's put it that way. And they've admitted to that ever since, you know. And you can't blame them. We're talking about John Lennon and Paul McCartney, you know. But so anyway, they recorded it because George Martin said, "Look, when you can write a song as good as this, I'll record it. Until then, this is what you'll do," which I am embarrassed about thinking even now. And so Brian Epstein thought the song was pretty good anyway, and he asked me if I would let Jerry and the Pacemakers record it. Who I'd never heard of either. But Jerry's version was unbelievably good.
So when you heard his version, did you know immediately
Absolutely,
that's it?
Yeah, because I refused to sign a publishing contract based on the Beatles record. And then when they played me Jerry and the Pacemakers version, I was delighted. Where do I sign? I was very, very happy with that.
Extraordinary. And I'm intrigued to know, though, from that point, that, you know, that was obviously your first hit, first number one. How do you get to that point with those people? Because you didn't come from a background of songwriters who were in the industry. So people can write amazing songs. That doesn't necessarily mean they're going to end up in the right place and become hits. How did you do it? To borrow your own lyric.
Oh, yeah, thank you. I suppose, listening to, I mean, when I started writing songs, I was just writing songs. And, you know, the fact that you finished a song doesn't mean it's going to make any money. And if it doesn't make money, you've got no career. So I eventually, a few people gave me advice. I went to publishers and they said, "Yeah, it's all right. It's a very nice song, very, very well written and all the rest of it, but who cares about it?" I said, "You know something, you're right." They said, "Listen to more of what's being played and the ones that are hits." And that was the best advice, really. Listen to the successful ones, try to work out why and why they do better than others. So that helped a lot. And then I just kept going, you know. And I was in 1 year, I'd had my first number one. It only took me a year, luckily. Yeah, that was it. And How Do You Do It was exactly 1 year after I'd started writing properly.
That is extraordinary.